The Penguin recently released its third episode, and it's safe to say that each week this show just keeps getting better and better. This was an episode that not only developed the plot forward, but it was heavily connected to the events that occurred in the 2019 Batman movie on that night in Gotham where the Riddler's plan was carried out and the city was buried underwater whilst also lit up in flames. We saw a different perspective of the events, and the first 5 minutes and 50 seconds of this episode really leaned into that. Not only was it a stylistic opening to the episode in terms of the way that it was executed, but it was also so important to the story, and specifically the mirroring arcs of Oz and Vic, but also the development of the character Vic and the pathway that he might well go down. So with that, let's break down this opening scene and discuss why it was so damn good. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The backstory to Vic. One of the main reasons that this opening scene was so important was because it gave us our first true insight into Vic and the type of person that he actually was. We'd heard glimpses about his family in the past, but we never truly knew what happened to them. But this showed us outright that his entire family fell victim to the floods that the Riddler caused, and they were all killed. This scene was kind of structured in 3/3. The first was about showing how important family was to Vic, his father's belief system, and that Vic had a strong desire for his family to do better. The second section was all about establishing his relationship with Graciela and showing that she was going to cause some kind of friction in the future due to his loyalty to her. And then the third was about him watching his family die in a horrific way. 3 completely different things that are within the core of the character in the present day and were dictating his actions later on in the episode. The first section really allowed us to understand why Vic was so conflicted in the present day. We saw that he cared about what his family thought of him and he was extremely close with them. So the fact that he was working with Oz a couple of weeks after the flooding and involved in the drug trade, something that his father made clear that he didn't want him around when he was concerned about a member of Squid's crew being on the roof when he was going out, it finally made sense as to why Vic was looking for a way out of working with Oz, because he didn't want to feel as though he was letting his father down. However, the drug trade that he was involved in was the very thing that was giving Vic everything that he always wanted his family to have: wealth and a better quality of life. Vic got $1,000 for a week's work off of Oz, something that his father most probably didn't get when he was alive. Plus, Vic was also eating at fancy restaurants, paying off cops simply because he had the funds to do so, and also learning that he could demand respect from people, something that it seemed like his father didn't really get either, because Vic mentioned that his father never got to eat in nice places despite loving food, and as well, he wasn't getting paid more for jobs that required him to buy parts. So the sense of conflict in Vic's head finally became so clear to us after initially only thinking he wanted out because he was essentially being held hostage there by Oz. I would genuinely argue that the first part of the scene is probably one of the more important takeaways from the episode, because it was all about conversation and how he interacted with the people that he cared about most, something we'd never seen before. With regards to the main part of that section, which is when the explosions happened, earlier on in the scene, before he left to go and meet Graciela, he was asked by his mother to stay at home and have dinner with them, but he chose not to. When the explosions went off and the water was racing towards the apartment block, we saw him in a panicked state, obviously. But what that showed us was that the events could have gone in a completely different way, and Vic could have actually ended up being killed that night along with his family if he decided to stay in. So the flashbacks that we saw him having to the event taking place is something that I think is because it was a traumatic experience and seeing his family being killed and not being able to do anything about it, but also because there could well be a sense of survivor's guilt inside of him. The feeling of, why did I survive and not them? He was so close to being killed, but he just got lucky. So I imagine that sat within him. He lost the people that he cared about most in the world on that night, and it was the day where he truly became alone. It was a transformative day, just like what the ending of episode 3 was as well. Vic went from being happy, having a loving family, and also being close with his girlfriend Graciela to everything unraveling. And at the end of episode 3, we saw Vic teetering on the fence about whether he should leave Oz and the opportunity to make something of himself, despite the fact that it would go against what his father would have wanted. And as well as that, he also killed for the first time, showing that he was now fully immersed within that life and there was no going back to the person that he was moments before. It was a transformative opening and ending. The mirrored arcs of Vic and Oz. What this opening section of the episode showed us as well was just how similar the background of Vic and Oz actually is, and why Oz probably cares about Vic like he's not cared about another. He seems to have a sense of loyalty to him, and it's actually quite refreshing to see. The first couple of seconds alone showed the nature of the environment. Look at the way that Vic and this stranger were staring each other down as they just walked past one another. It set the tone and established the environment as being this hostile place where you're looking at people that pass you to see if there's going to be any damage done. This is the type of life that Oz came from, and it's clear to see that Vic is used to it. We heard later on in the episode Oz saying, "A guy like me getting all that," when referring to him getting the drop business and the club when he ratted on Sophia. So it showed that he pretty much came from nothing but had the hunger and desire to want more, exactly like what we saw Vic expressing to his father. As well as that, Oz clearly went through some family trauma when he was younger with regards to him losing his brothers, and it could well have changed the character and sent him on the pathway that he eventually ended up going down. With Vic going through the traumatic experience of watching his entire family being killed and us seeing that, it seems like that's also going to be the case with him as he looks to develop whilst working with Oz. Trauma and loss were the main motivators, and making your family proud from beyond the grave, it connects the both of them. It's slowly starting to make sense why these two characters have a deep-rooted connection with one another. Oz sees himself in Vic, and Vic sees opportunity for a real change in his life when he looks at Oz. And this opening scene bridged that gap for us and showed us a past that Oz was probably familiar with. Why the opening scene was perfect. This opening scene had moments within it that just connected to every aspect of the episode in some way. Whether it be Vic feeling guilty about being involved in that life, being in a restaurant that he felt out of place in, even the obvious moments like the flashback occurring when he was in the club and he was taken back to that night. I really feel as though we got to understand the character and truly see why he was like the way that he was, something we hadn't seen up until that point. It was all guesswork, but this was the part of the episode where Vic became human to us. The performance that Renzi Felix gave during this scene laid down the foundations for the extremely strong performance that we saw throughout the entire episode. He absolutely smashed his performance as Vic in this week's installment. I liked the way that the show kind of lured us into thinking that it was the night in question from the movie with the flies that were on the ground for Bella Real, the news broadcast on the TV being on in the background, and also setting the scene for there to be fireworks, but it actually turning out to be deadly explosions. It was just perfect. We knew what was coming, but the characters didn't, and it's a strange feeling when it's like that. Devastation was only around the corner. Visually, it was such a haunting experience to watch. It was so glossy and clean to look at, but it was horrific to watch unfolding. So it was really jarring on the mind in a good way, because I feel like they wanted us to experience it like that. I would also say the constant cutting to Vic's face in a close-up shot really allowed us to see the emotions that he was experiencing. We didn't need to see his family dying up close in the apartment. We just needed to see Vic's reaction and just how devastating it was to understand the severity of it, and also that it was going to change him for good. We saw the moment Vic's life changed forever, and why he was like the way that he was in the present day. It was a needed scene. It was so important to the story, and it was quite literally perfect. So, there you have it. If you want to see more videos on the Penguin, then click on the card in the top corner. I'm breaking down every episode, so there's an entire playlist there. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of the opening scene? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.